approval ratings, but not presidential. We don't delve into the political world here. I want to talk to you tonight for just a few minutes about SEC coaching approval ratings, because we have something very unprecedented in nature happening. A lot of people are happy in the SEC right now. There's almost a suspicious level of happiness around the conference. There's no hot seat lists. There's no do or die season coming up for anyone not named Brian Harsin. And even with Brian Harsin, when they label it a possible do or die season, it's not for the classical reasons. It's not because he's 4 or 5 years in and he's been given all the rope and he hasn't gotten it done. So, hey, it's time. It's time. Show us or we're moving on. Where is it? It's never the case in the SEC. It's the most rabid, it's usually the shortest tenure on average that a coach could have, and yet there's none of it around the conference right now. But as you have learned, along with me, if you've watched this conference for any length of time, happiness today usually equals chaos tomorrow. And so right now there is a lot of happiness around the SEC. I want to discuss, though, just how unprecedented this whole situation is. There are 14 jobs in the SEC. There are 14 programs right now. And I was thinking to myself when we were talking about Brian Harsin the other day, I kind of mentioned it on the show, but I wanted to circle back around to it. I was thinking, hey, outside of Harsin, where's the next lowest approval rating? In fact, about 2 or 3 hours ago, I asked you guys this. I said, next to Brian Harsin, where's the next lowest approval rating? And I asked on Twitter, and I had some folks saying Jimbo Fisher. Just to give you an idea, I don't agree with that. But even if, for the sake of argument, we do agree with that, that's how wide the gap is between Brian Harsin, who would be your 14th highest approval rating right now, and whoever number 13 is. I would make the argument, and we're about to dive into it and do our little forensic analysis, you and I, but I would argue outside of Harsin, everyone else not only has an approval rating above 50%, probably a supermajority approval rating. They're probably above 60%. Think about this. Let's start in the SEC East. Let's just rattle through these right quick. Kirby Smart just won the national championship like 10 minutes ago. Kirby Smart is right there with guys like Nick Saban as not only having one of the highest overall approval ratings in the conference, but probably in the country. I don't know what in the world Kirby Smart would have to do at this point to anger people in Georgia. So not only did they just win a title, but it wasn't any kind of fluke thing. It's been an accumulation of acquiring high-level recruiting classes for several years. He is of Georgia, so there's not much that needs to be said here. Kirby Smart is well into the 90% approval rating territory, which is lofty. Even when you win a title, that's pretty lofty. What about Mark Stoops? I was talking with producer Jesse before the show, and of course you've got Smart and Saban we'll talk about in a second, but outside of those two guys, maybe the most secure coach in the entire SEC could be Mark Stoops at Kentucky. A lot of folks in the coaching industry think Mark Stoops has the best job pound for pound in America because he gets paid SEC money, but yet the sky-high expectation level of double-digit win average per year or you're fired does not exist in Lexington, Kentucky. And so Mark Stoops is hanging out there, and he's got Kentucky relevant on the national radar. They recruit very well, in fact, exceedingly well, judging by what historically you've been able to do at Kentucky. So Mark Stoops, easily in the 80th percentile when it comes to approval rating. He's sky high too. Then we get into some newcomers. 2 years in, the next two guys really. Josh Heupel at Tennessee. All I can go off of so far is what we have. And last year there was a lot of unknown, and to be honest, there's still a lot of unknown, but think about being a Tennessee fan, because we're talking about the fan base here. What they look at is they look at a disaster situation that was left behind. They looked at a very unenviable position because there was an ongoing NCAA investigation, still is for the record. And they found not only a head coach, but a head coach and athletic director combo that wanted to come to Knoxville. And so we've got Danny White there, formerly known as Mike White on this program. Danny White there, and then we've also got Josh Heupel. Josh Heupel exceeded expectations last year. Josh Heupel had a mess on his hands in terms of roster in the spring. Remember where we were, if you're Tennessee this time last year? And he made the best out of a horrible situation, and they won, 7 games? Almost won a bowl game. So point being, he overachieved relative to expectation in year one, which means he's probably got a sky-high approval rating too. I don't know the exact number I would put on it. I would put it above 70%, and anybody who's not approving of the job he's done at Tennessee so far is not disapproving. They're out to lunch. They're of the remains to be seen category. So Josh Heupel, clearly above 60%. What about Shane Beamer? Shane Beamer's at South Carolina, exact same situation. I would argue even more emphatic than what Josh Heupel did. Shane Beamer came in and their over-under win total was 4.5, depending on where you look, and they exceeded that above and beyond. They also ended up winning their bowl game. They beat North Carolina, and you just think about being in the preseason last year and anyone telling you they're going to beat Florida in year one. They're going to beat Auburn in year one. They're going to beat North Carolina. North Carolina was a dark horse playoff contender in preseason magazine land this time last year. And they got all three of those wins under their belt in year one. Not only that, but then you start getting into the bowl season, and then you get in January and they make a couple of big moves in the transfer portal. He's already one of them. He was the fan choice there. So you have built in a higher approval rating right off the bat than you normally would if an outsider would have come in and had to win the fan base over. Shane Beamer's got one of the higher approval ratings in the conference. I'm looking. So far, we've gone through 4 guys. We don't have anyone even remotely close to being below 60%. This next guy is probably one of the closest that we'll see come to that 60% threshold. And it's at Missouri. It's Eli Drinkwitz. Now, Eli Drinkwitz has been there a couple of years. I think they've had a 5-win season, 6-win season. Remember, one of those was the COVID year, so the record's all out of whack. You know what they just did, though? For anyone who argues this is probably the guy, he's probably on thin ice with hot blades, he just landed the 14th recruiting class in the country at Missouri. Now, you didn't hear a whole lot about it. Well, you did if you watched our show on signing day. You haven't heard a whole lot about it nationally because they're in the SEC, and you know finishing 14th means finishing like middle of the pack in the SEC. But that's one of the best classes we've ever seen Missouri have. And so he's got some people buying in. He's got kids buying in. The fan base is more than pleased, at least to a supermajority level. They're more than pleased with where they are. So it's not Drinkwitz. He's not below 60%. Billy Napier just got to Florida, and he's already won over a lot of people by doing the bare minimum in terms of living arrangements and nutrition and parking tickets. A lot of people are excited about the staff he's put together, so it's certainly not Billy Napier. Clark Lee is the other guy that probably you would arrive at. In fact, I had a few people when I put this on Twitter earlier today say, well, my guess for the lowest approval ratings in the conference is Harsin and whoever the coach at Vanderbilt is. Half of you didn't even know who it was. Well, it's Clark Lee. I can safely confirm to you, if this is the answer, it's not because he's below 60%. Not only did they just have their first year there, so you really had no time to accurately judge Clark Lee, but if you do want to judge him, this is the most incredible secret stat from signing day. Everyone's focused on these big classes that Georgia and Alabama are bringing in. We just talked about programs like even Missouri finishing top 15. Do you know Vanderbilt finished with the 32nd ranked recruiting class in America? In America. 32nd ranked recruiting class. It's phenomenal. A lot of people think that that's impossible to be done at Vanderbilt. Well, it wasn't. This past cycle, at least, it wasn't. I would counter with anyone who thinks Clark Lee is the answer here. What more could he possibly have done so far? You got to measure this relative to what you have. There's a lot of context that has to be included here. So, I mean, they just performed not even a minor miracle, just an outright miracle. This is a division where no one's even close. No coach is even close to below 60% approval rating. So then you hop over the Chattahoochee River and you go to the West. You start in the obvious position, in the pole position there. Nick Saban and Alabama, highest approval rating probably in the country. So we don't even waste a whole lot of time on Nick Saban. Probably one of the only times you'll hear me say that on the show. Lane Kiffin, though, Jesse put this order together. He says it's, what was it, order of finish last year, Jesse? So Lane Kiffin in the second position here. Lane Kiffin just won double-digit games. They just put together a completely overhauled roster via the transfer portal. You know what that signifies, by the way, to a fan base? That signifies we've got a guy who is able to sell our community and sell our university. It's one thing if you're getting it done in recruiting, because sometimes that means you're bringing in a lot of in-state kids, you know, from Hattiesburg or Tupelo or Philadelphia. Because yes, friends, there is a Philadelphia, Mississippi. And you're bringing in kids, you know, this is an anecdotal argument, but sometimes they'll say, well, yeah, those kids were never leaving Mississippi. Okay, it's not always true, but I'll grant you that. Okay. Well, the kids he's bringing in via the transfer portal are not native Mississippians. And so that is the emphasis. That's the focal point there for Lane Kiffin to say, I'm able to sell Ole Miss nationally. And he is. He's right about that. Lane Kiffin has a very high approval rating right now. Also, Lane Kiffin uniquely fits Ole Miss. It's a culture thing. He fits Ole Miss. So not even close to being below 60% there. Sam Pittman, Arkansas, I don't think we need to waste a whole lot of time there either. It wouldn't be a waste. But when we're talking about approval ratings below 60%, no. We could talk about one above 90% because Sam Pittman's up there in Mark Stoops, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban territory. I challenge anyone. Go across the entire state of Arkansas. I challenge anyone. Find someone who is a true Razorback fan, not like a closet Arkansas State fan who's just posing. Find me a true Arkansas fan who is speaking ill of Sam Pittman right now. I don't know, what would the ammunition be? I have no clue. I think they had a great year last year. And certainly, he is also kind of ditto in that category of proving that he can sell Arkansas. Then we get to Texas A&M. Now, this is where I had the most interesting bits of feedback on this entire, not a poll, but on this entire question about which coach would have the second lowest approval rating. Because some people went with Jimbo Fisher, and their simple argument was, so far, relative to the talent roster he has there, he has not achieved at the highest of high levels. I'll grant you that. Now, I'm not here to defend Jimbo Fisher, but the counter, and the reason I don't think he's anywhere, he's not even below 70%, much less 60%, is because of what they're doing now, and also the entire new feel around the program. Even if you did feel like that coming out of last year, even if you did feel like that, what they just did in recruiting and what it seems they're going to continue doing in recruiting, I mean, it's like you turn a whole new page. It's a whole new chapter, not just a page of the future of Texas A&M football. Texas A&M is resonating on the national level right now in recruiting more so than they ever have, at least in the modern era. And I would argue, although it's a short sample size right now, I'll grant you that, I would argue just ever, period. Hadn't really seen them do what they just did in this last class. Now it's up to them to make it continue, but no one that I've spoken to at least in and around Texas A&M saying, well, yeah, we're getting all the talent, but ultimately Jimbo's not going to be the guy. No one thinks that. No one thinks that around Texas A&M. So that would not be my answer. So we continue our search. Is it Mike Leach? Might Mike Leach have the second lowest approval rating? Maybe, because it's all relative, but Mike Leach just went 7-6 in his, second year, I believe, at Mississippi State. And they also went on the road and beat Texas A&M last year. And they went on the road and beat Auburn last year. And those sorts of things are really, really big deals. Those are huge feathers in the cap of the head coach at Mississippi State. This dude's parked in the middle of the toughest division in the toughest conference in America. Now, Jesse made an interesting point when we were tossing around these names earlier. He said, you know what I actually think? I actually think because of his persona, Mike Leach may have a higher approval rating nationally even than he does around Mississippi State. And while I don't think he's got a low approval rating in Starkville, I actually think that's probably true. A lot of people just kind of, they gravitate to Mike Leach when he's around a microphone. Whether you like him or not, don't like him as much, you're going to shut up and listen to what he says at the very least. So Mike Leach is not below 60%. Brian Kelly just got to LSU, so Brian Kelly certainly not below 60%. We've gone through 13 names. There's only one guy left, and you know who it is, and that is Auburn head coach for the moment, Brian Harsin. And we saw what just happened in year one. It started off fairly strong. I think they had a good showing, even in games they lost, like the one, for example, against Penn State. They played, really tough-nosed football against the likes of LSU. They went to Arkansas and won, which is not easy to do last year. But they sputtered down the stretch. Things could be totally different. Entire context could change if they had beaten Alabama, which it was on the table for them to do, and they let it slip through their fingertips. But Brian Harsin would probably be, he's easily the lowest approval rating. The guy's 1 year in. So we really don't have a clue what we have in Brian Harsin yet. Of course, the biggest fear around Auburn, and if you're just kind of anecdotally rooting for the guy, is your biggest fear is he's not going to get a chance to play with a full deck of cards down there because he's kind of hamstrung by administrative forces, shall we say, and maybe external forces, not administrative. But where could it all go sideways? Because if you've watched SEC football for a long time, this never is the case, first off. And anytime it is the case that you look around and say, not many guys in the hot seat around here, you're always about one season away from half the conference being on red alert. And so where could it go wrong? Well, of course, the first thing that could happen is you could have scandal. But no one can predict scandal. So outside of scandal, where could it go wrong? Well, you could have total cliff dives. You know, if Clark Lee and Vanderbilt don't ever get past a 2 or 3 win plateau, or let's say at a place like Mississippi State. Let's say they are competitive, but they just can't put enough wins on the board, and they keep having to play who they have to play every year. And so you finish 4-8 a couple of years. I mean, that could be something you watch out for. I would also think, now that we go back to Texas A&M, if Jimbo Fisher had another 8-4 year this year, how would that be received? It's not that he would be on a hot seat necessarily, but it would start a few more folks chattering behind the scenes about whether we have the right staff in place here to take advantage of all this talent. And these are all hypotheticals. I'm asking, where could it go wrong? It's not going to go wrong at Bama. It's not going to go wrong at Georgia. I think South Carolina and Tennessee, if they had disappointing sophomore seasons, and I'm talking about maybe even missing a bowl game, they had disappointing sophomore seasons, 5-7 type seasons after promising debuts, that could be where you start hearing some chatter going into 2023. I don't know where it's going to come from. And most of the time, when coaches end up getting themselves in hot water and you track it backwards, it normally wasn't all that easy to see coming. I mean, Ed Orgeron won a national championship in 2019 while that confetti was raining down. Was anyone saying, enjoy it, Ed, you're gone next year? No, not even the detractors were that forceful in describing the future of Ed Orgeron. I don't know where it's going to come from. I just know in this conference particularly, there is no way that you can maintain this much tranquility. There is a sea of tranquility, but it's on the moon. It's not in the SEC. In the SEC, when there's a lot of happiness, it usually precedes wailing and gnashing of teeth. I guess that's good for our show, but for some fan bases out there, there's a lot of confidence right now, and it's faux confidence, faux with an X, because there are tough roads ahead.